So we finally have hit our milestone here. Our car is complete, we have the engine installed, and we're getting ready to start this up for the first time today. 7 years in the making, over 5,000 hours, and I gotta tell you, I'm definitely tired. Over 150 videos on the restoration of this car. So I have most things sorted out already. I have a checklist here of some things that are very important to a first-time startup. You do a full restoration, put your car back together, and also an engine on top of that. This list could keep you out of trouble, as it really is an A to Z process. Do one thing before the other, really get yourself in a corner, end up with a problem. And at this stage, we just don't want any problems. So anyhow, let's check out our list here. Let's see what's on it. Let's start checking it off one at a time. We're going to add some fluids, turn this thing over, see what happens. All right, let's start by taking a look and see what we have on our stand here to get started. I'm using Motul Classic 2050 weight for our initial startup. A total of 9 liters. So these come in 5-liter cans. Just drain off 1 liter out of one of them and then empty the contents into the car. So what I'm doing here is I put 1 can in here already. I left it go overnight and just check for any kind of seepage or any kind of issues that might be occurring before we start the car. If you got something that needs tightening up or any kind of fittings that are starting to seep out, you can address it then before we put too much oil in there. So the other thing we're going to need is fuel, and I'm going to be using a premium unleaded fuel and adding some fuel stabilizer. If you're into older cars and carbureted type cars, classic cars, this is definitely a must, because the newer fuels, the ethanol, the carburetor bodies don't perform well with the new ethanol gasolines. It's actually corrosive to them, and just deteriorates all the rubbers, the seals, the diaphragms. Everything in your carburetor is really under attack with modern fuel. So that is definitely a must all the time that you have your car. So we have a synchrometer here. I've got a voltmeter, check for voltage, a timing light. Also these rear axle nuts, I'm just waiting on the thick washers to go with those. I mean, we have nuts on the car now, but these really should be replaced when you are finished with your restoration and the car is sitting on the ground under full weight with the engine installed. 250 foot-pounds of torque on those, so a lot of stress on those. Really a good idea to replace those when you're finished. And then looking at our list here from A to Z, I've tried to put this together in exact progressive order as what we'll be doing it for methodical reasons. Starting from the top, let's just go over some of these, starting with a charging battery to full. Let's see what's going on with that, and then we'll see what needs to happen for testing. So when we get our car running, the voltage here will change. We should see between 13 and 14 volts. If we see that, then we know our alternator is charging. So we're fully charged, and cables are disconnected. Now I have those cables press on tight by hand only. I'm not going to put them on there and wrench them down and hope for the best. And the reason I want them removable by hand is if there's a problem, in an emergency, I want to get here right away and be able to unplug something and not have to be wrestling and looking for wrenches and dealing with that. So what we want to do when we test the electrical system is we just want somebody on this end, because we just installed the engine, want somebody on this end to hook up the ground strap and then touch our positive lead while I'm at the other end of the car looking for anything, any kind of noise, any kind of spark, any kind of smoke coming from anywhere. I'm looking on top of the engine and I'm looking underneath the engine for anything that could possibly be going wrong. I'm asking them to go ahead and touch the terminal so I know I got continuity, and then I'm telling them when to let go. If I don't see anything going on, I know we're pretty safe and we can move on to the next thing. Okay, and then looking at the business end here of the car, I've hooked up a temporary oil pressure gauge. You can see that coming around here and resting on the front here. And what this is going to tell me upon initial startup is going to tell me if I've got oil pressure and what kind of pressure I've got. It's okay if you're in the car and looking at your gauges, but you're going to be back here focusing on everything that's going on. It's all going to be coming at you, and you really want everything right here. So on the ground here, I've got a remote starter switch hooked up to the starter motor and the solenoid, and I've already tried that out. It works really good, and I've got just enough lead to bring it up here where I can work with it as needed. Okay, so we got about 5 liters of oil that's been sitting in here since last night, so I can visually check around underneath for any kind of seepage or leaks. And also with that oil in there, it's made its way down into the bottom of the case to some degree, and will help us out if we start cranking the engine. So I've got an old spark plug here, and my next test then, before I add fuel, is I want to test every spark plug, 1 through 3, 4 through 6, and make sure that I have spark before I try to start this car. So I just take the old spark plug, I pull the number 1 wire, plug that spark plug in there, and then ground it on something. If I see it sparking when I'm turning the engine over, that's good enough. You don't have to keep going with it. You just need to see that it is getting spark. And I verified already all 6 are getting spark, so that eliminates any problems with the distributor cap or any of the wires. With that test, we also know that our coil will be working, so everything electrically now is working as it should. Okay, so that pretty much concludes the checklist. Let's go ahead and just take a peek underneath the car and see how things finished out, as I had to make a few adjustments under there since we installed our engine. Okay, a little bit tight under here to see things, but at least you get some kind of an idea what it's all going to look like and situate like. So I've double checked the torque on everything, double checked and triple checked, went around and made sure all my other gasketed areas, all the nuts are nice and tight, nothing's leaking out. We have our axles installed now and torqued down, and our rear oil lines all routed and tightened up. I did have to move this one clamp here. I moved it from the lower nut to the top nut, and that seemed to work out okay, and nothing else seemed to be an issue. The only thing I found, you can see it's got kind of a bend going to it. When you're routing that hose up in through this back area, you're going to have to kind of feel up in there and feel around that you don't have any kind of a fold or a sharp bend in there, because if you do, you're going to greatly affect your oil pressure. So you really just need to feel around, make sure it's sitting up in there and it's all tucked away, nice, safe and sound, and it doesn't have any folds in it. And then the other thing I had to do is trim the heater tubing there. Definitely much too long. It was just all piled up by the time we got it positioned in there. But much more graceful bend if you shorten it up a little bit. And then everything back here all fastened off and boots connected, and that is a lot of fun. Okay, let's finish adding some oil and some fuel and get this guy started. Next, we're going to hook up our fuel pump and then prime our carburetors. Our fuel pump installs. So I've got a little bit of a bummer going here. We're not getting fuel from the fuel tank to the fuel pump. We have electric working on the fuel pump, but we don't have any suction, or at least it appears we don't have any suction. Let me sleep on this overnight, as I've been at this all day, and I really just don't feel like wrestling with that guy right now, pulling that off of there and sorting it out. I'll think on it overnight, what it could be. Also, I'll try and reach out to the vendor and see if he might have any thoughts as to what it could be, or any tech advice on that. Okay, so back out here again this morning for round 2, and hopefully we can sort out this fuel pump. So I had one thought last night while I was mulling this over, that one problem could be that I've only put about 2 gallons of gas in the fuel tank up front, and from what I remember, running the fuel line from the tank to the main feed line that runs down the tunnel, it has to go up and over the steering rack assembly, which is quite a lift. So if I don't have enough fuel in there, that could be an issue there. So I think we need to put more fuel in there. And I even thought about elevating too, to lean the car so that the fuel will drain towards the pump and at least get things primed. And then also I reached out to the vendor who sold us this pump a few years back. Got a quick reply from him. And the good news is that he doesn't seem to think that there's anything wrong with the fuel pump internally. He seems to think that we just need to get it primed, so he recommended elevating the front of the car to some degree to at least get the system going here. Okay, so I added more gas, so we got a total of about 4 gallons of gas, which should be more than enough to get up and over that steering rack. We're slightly elevated and leaning towards the rear. That should help us towards the fuel pump. Let's go ahead and hook up our battery and see what happens. There it is. We got it. We got fuel. Okay, that's definitely much better. So let me go ahead and lower the front of the car down so we're sitting on completely level ground. Then we can check our floats and look down our carburetors and see if we have any leaks, and we'll go from there. Okay, let's take a look and see what's going on with our carburetors here. So on the left side, our rear vial was filling to the top lines, which is okay as long as it doesn't get any higher than that. And I didn't see any leaks down into the chambers. On this side here, our right needle and seat cap was bleeding out fuel at the top. It was loose, and then I'm getting fuel in the front 2 chambers here. So right now I'm soaking up that fuel with some paper towel, just kind of wicking it out of there, and then I'm going to set it into this cup here filled full of water. So while we're working with fuel, we're going to have fire extinguishers handy at all times for safety reasons, because you never know what can happen when you're working with fuel and trying to start an old car. So I'm going to tighten down these caps here, soak that fuel up, and try again. Okay, so as you can see, I'm not having much fun here now, and this has turned into the battle of the carburetors. So what happened is about a year ago, it's been almost a year exactly, we test run these carburetors on Kurt's test engine up in Flagstaff and dialed everything in as best we could. The recommendations were to switch out the floats to the newer style plastic float because they have a safety tab on them to stop the floats from sticking. And we did have one of our brass floats stick, and so that's why we switched out to those. Also, we put some new air-fuel mixture screws in them. So when I redid everything here at the bench, everything went together pretty good. I didn't undo anything at the top here. I didn't mess with any of these screws, didn't tighten anything. I just basically took the lids off, went through the floats, reset them back up exactly like the other ones, and put them back together. But after sitting for almost a year, virtually everything on these carburetors has loosened up. Our top caps have gotten loose, accelerator pump screws have loosened up. Everything just seems to shrink up and become smaller over time. That could be the phenolic washers drying out and shrinking. Also the diaphragm in there with your accelerator pump could be shrinking up. But anyhow, I got all the leaks cured and trying to set my floats now. And now we're dealing with this newer style float. And so I had problems with these when I tried to set these up on the bench. And these are a nightmare. I spent a half a day setting these things up. And the design really, the concept is good, but the design, in my opinion, is just terrible. So what's happening is, here's an old needle and seat. So what they want to do is they want you to measure to the tang here like you would on your brass float. And I don't really like these tangs because they're stainless steel. They don't bend easy, and they've got more of a rake of an angle rather than a 90-degree perpendicular angle to the ball up and down. So I don't like that part of it. And trying to straighten those out being stainless steel, really, really tough when you're working with a very delicate situation. The other thing, the design here, as you can see, so this is what's supposed to happen. This is supposed to seat here. And to stop this thing from jamming in the float bowl, it's supposed to rest up against the needle and seat. The problem with that is, in order for that to do that, you need at least 1 millimeter of clearance off the bottom of the float bowl, and then it needs to be touching. Otherwise, it's going to be resting on the bottom of the float bowl, which null and voids the tang here, the safety tang. Now, if you press this too far back, you got nothing. If you get it right where it needs to be, by the time you drop your top caps in, you're getting right on that edge there. And that's only 1 millimeter off the bottom. So we're not up here. We're like right here. Drop the top in. This thing's hitting there, messing up everything. We got fuel everywhere. I think this idea right here is just ridiculous. This tank should be on the bottom and should be bearing against the carburetor body, not this thing here. This is interfering with this. Just a really terrible design. I'll get through this. I'll figure it all out. But this is a whole nother day right here. We're going to have to sort this out, get everything remeasured, and hopefully get these tanks to clear the needle and seat and not have fuel all over a brand new engine. All right, guys, let me get this done. We're going to be another day into this before we can start this engine. Okay, so 4 hours later, the battle of the carburetors is finally over. I've managed to contain all leakages, and we have reset all our floats, all our measurements there, and dialed everything in with our vials. And so literally we're ending up with 1/4 of a millimeter variance between them. If I add 1/4 of a millimeter, we're going to overflow. If I take away 1/4 of a millimeter, we're going to be under. So I've got everything as tight as we can get it. I'm just going to let things dry out overnight now before we try and start this in the morning, as I'm really tired and I don't want to take on any more for today. So let this guy dry out. We'll come out in the morning and start her up. Okay, so our fuel pump is not drawing fuel up again from the tank. I'm not sure why this time. Let me sort this out and we'll try again here in a moment. Okay, so one more disappointment here again today. I tried elevating the car again to help the fuel pump prime. For some reason it drains back and then it just doesn't want to bring it back on, so I don't know what's going on internally. The rubber seal on the bottom here, that looks to be in really nice shape and is plenty supple. The filter screen here has got a slight tear in it, you can see there, but that wouldn't have any effect on the suction ability, and the suction is coming from the bottom side here. So this could take another day, this could take another couple weeks depending on what the outcome is here. I'm going to contact the vendor one more time and see what we can do about this. Once we get this sorted out, I'm pretty sure we'll be able to start this car. Okay, so this has been a real setback here. I've got this one completely taken apart as far as I can take it apart. And this O-ring here that sits inside this plastic housing, there's a valve in here that flutters, goes up and down. You can see that guy working there. Well, this seal is supposed to sit in here like so. Here's a good one. And somehow during assembly it looks like it got pinched and deformed, and this is breaking the seal or the vacuum inside the pump, which is in here. So that seal sits around this guy right here. I talked to the vendor, Peter Hart from Hart Classic Parts out of Australia, and I've decided to buy a new pump in addition to getting this one resolved here. And the reason being is because of just the whole setback of it all. So if for some reason your pump fails inside your car, unless you have a spare pump in your tool bag, which is real easy to switch out. If you don't have one, you're looking at a tow truck situation to get your car moving, because there's no way something like this is going to work out on the side of a road. Anyhow, he recommends that I take this piston here and just clean it up with some emery paper. You can see just some slight galling in there where it was running dry, overworking it a little bit too much. So we just sand this guy up. I'm going to lube it up with some 3-in-1 oil, lubricate our seal really good, make sure it's nice and lubricated inside as we get our gas flowing. So let me go ahead and put this thing together. We'll try again in the morning. Okay, so here we are bright and early again. Going to give it another go. Hopefully we can get something to happen here this morning. I've got everything hooked up. I've got timing light hooked up. I have all the carburation sorted out. No more leakages. We got good fuel pump. And so all we really need to do is press our remote starter button, pump these carburetors, and see what happens. Also, I've got a fan set up here, and this will take out some of the heat underneath the car as we're working from the top side there, or at least help to dissipate some of it. Screwdriver there. We're going to adjust the idle to around 2,000 RPMs once we get this thing started, and just let it run and break itself in. And then after that, we can do some timing and carburation tune-up. Okay, accelerator pumps are working. Battery. Alright, looking good. 14 volts. Okay, so from here I've got a lot of adjusting and dialing in to do. I can already tell my linkage is way off, but was good enough for a startup and keep it running smooth through break-in. At the beginning, wow, lots of smoke coming out that tailpipe. All the oil on the rings and all the oiling we did down in the valves as we did our pre-assembly lube. But most of that's burned away now, so hopefully that stops. Okay guys, so I'm just going to play with it from here. There it is, first time in 45 years this car has run. So we're going to be doing a lot more videos on this car as we go forward, get things dialed in and adjusted. But that's going to do it for this one today. What a battle.